Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into Hercule Poirot and the Smile Before Death, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Hercule Poirot. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. The Smile That Shouldn't Exist. The scream came first. High, sharp, and so out of place in the lavish calm of the Belmont Hotel that every champagne flute in the lounge seemed to tremble with it. Poirot's eyes snapped open. He had not been sleeping, merely resting, as he always insisted. But the sound sliced the early evening calm, like a scalpel to silk. And then, silence, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the far corner. Tick, tick, tick. And then the chaos began. The body was found beneath the great chandelier, sprawled like a marionette, whose strings had been cruelly cut. His name was Felix Hartmore, a young, charming Englishman with a trust fund, a reputation for reckless seduction, and a habit of smiling as if every moment were a private joke. But the smile he wore in death, that smile was wrong. Poirot arrived at the scene not by coincidence. He had been invited to the Belmont for a discreet consultation regarding theft, not murder. But murder had a way of arriving uninvited. Mon Dieu. The eyes were glassy, half open, but it was the mouth, fixed in that uncanny upward curl that sent a chill down Poirot's back. It was not the smile of a man at peace. It was the twisted mockery of happiness, an expression that did not belong to a corpse. "Suicide?" murmured the hotel manager, Mr. Claude Renier, dabbing his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief. He was troubled. Everyone knew. The gambling debts, the associations. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Non, monsieur. He may have been troubled. But this," he gestured to the smile, "this is not the work of despair. It is the theatre of death." Detective Inspector Arlen of the local constabulary arrived minutes later, brushing past guests who whispered behind gloved hands and half-empty cocktails. Arlen was a practical man, not a believer in theatrics. "We'll call it suicide until the evidence says otherwise," he said, kneeling over the body. "Tox screen, forensics, the usual—" "I must insist," Poirot interrupted softly, "that the smile be noted, precisely as it is. Fixé, preserved." He leaned closer. "And tell me, Monsieur l'Inspecteur, does it not strike you as strange that the man is holding a carnation, red, still fresh, not wilting, as if just placed?" Arlen grunted. "It's a hotel, Poirot. People buy flowers. But not after they are dead." Poirot's gaze drifted upward to the chandelier. It swayed gently, the chain making a faint creak, like a breath caught in the throat of the room. Everything else was still. The guests had been evacuated, but Poirot saw things others did not. The overturned champagne glass 3 tables away, the scuff mark near the Persian rug, the faint smell of gardenia, incongruent with the rose-scented air. Later that evening, as the rain tapped softly against the window panes of his suite, Poirot sat with a single lamp glowing beside him. His little grey cells were ablaze. Felix Hartmore had no known enemies, or so the guests claimed. But Poirot knew everyone has enemies, especially those who smile too much. 3 guests in particular, drew his attention. The first was Miss Daphne Vale, a porcelain-skinned violinist whose fingers trembled ever so slightly as she played, and whose eyes lingered too long on Felix's photograph when it was shown. She claimed to have been in the music salon during the murder, yet her sheet music was dry, uncreased, and not a single instrument string showed signs of recent use. The second was Mr. Lionel Braxby, a failed playwright-turned-critic who had known Felix since university. He made biting remarks about the deceased. He finally got the audience he deserved, but his left shoe had a smear of crimson wax, identical to the kind used on the Belmonde's ballroom floor. And the third was Madame Celeste Duval, the wealthy widow whose fortune Hartmore had recently entangled himself with. Her face was composed, her mourning veil impeccably placed. But Poirot noted the inconsistency. Her grief was too symmetrical. The next morning brought more lies. "I hadn't spoken to Felix in days," said Daphne Vale over coffee. "We'd drifted." But Poirot's sharp eye saw the faint ink mark on her wrist, half washed away, a love note hastily scrubbed. She had written to him, and recently. Poirot pressed further. "You are sure you did not hear the scream?" "Non, monsieur. I was practicing with earplugs. Yet your violin rests exactly where it was 3 nights ago," Poirot observed. "Forgive me, mademoiselle, but a musician does not abandon her art so easily." She flushed. I had a headache." Poirot murmured. "Yes, that too can be practiced." Mr. Braxby was less subtle. His hands fidgeted with his cravat. Felix was a liar, a parasite. He used people, including Daphne. "Ah," Poirot said gently, "but perhaps she used him as well?" Braxby's smile faded. "What are you suggesting?" Poirot merely tilted his head. "That everyone smiles, monsieur. But only the murderer smiles after death." The red carnation became central. The florist in the hotel lobby had sold exactly 5 of them that day. 1 to a bellboy, 2 to a honeymooning couple, and the last 2, signed for but not claimed, by room 418. Room 418 was unoccupied. Or so it seemed. Poirot traced the signature. Noir. A fake. But the handwriting had a slight leftward lean, indicative of a woman's hand trying to mimic a man's. Celeste Duval, perhaps, or Daphne. But then came the twist. Late that night, Poirot received an anonymous envelope. Inside, a photograph. Black and white, blurry, but unmistakable. Felix Hartmore, smiling, and beside him, Lionel Braxby, holding a red carnation. It was dated the day before the murder. Poirot felt the chill run through him. The smile. It was not merely staged in death, it was recreated. He summoned Braxby the next morning. "You were seen with Felix," Poirot said, "at the café on Rue du Mars." Braxby laughed. "That photo is from years ago." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Non, monsieur. It is from yesterday. For in the background is a poster for a film that opened only this week. A detail small, but not invisible." Braxby's expression cracked. "All right, I saw him. He wanted money. He always wanted money. But did he want your career too? Your reputation? Did he threaten to expose you?" Braxby's lips parted, but no answer came. Poirot let the silence settle. "The truth, it is like a ghost, monsieur. It lingers until it is acknowledged." That night, Poirot returned to the ballroom. He walked the perimeter slowly, carefully. There, behind a velvet curtain, he found the second twist, a secret compartment. Inside, a pair of gloves, stained faintly with wax and something more sinister, cyanide. The same poison found in Hartmore's blood. The gloves were monogrammed, C.D. Celeste Duval. Poirot confronted her gently. She sat by the fireplace, hands folded like a marble statue. "He broke your heart," Poirot said, "and your pride." Celeste met his gaze without flinching. "He lied to me. He promised marriage. Then I found the letters. From Daphne, from others. He kept them like trophies." "So you killed him?" "No." Her voice broke slightly. "I came to confront him. I slapped him. That's all." He laughed. He always laughed. Poirot nodded slowly. "We," and yet he stopped laughing. He left her with the gloves. She did not protest. Back in his suite, Poirot assembled the pieces. The smile, the flower, the poison, the photograph, and then clarity. Felix had been poisoned before the chandelier fell. The body had been moved, staged. And only someone familiar with the ballroom's secrets could have known about the compartment. Poirot requested a reenactment. Each suspect was brought to the scene. Poirot described the crime in detail. He observed reactions. And then, as the storm outside swelled to a crescendo, Poirot turned to Daphne Vale. "You loved him, but he betrayed you. So you wrote him a letter. You begged him to meet. In this room, you wore gloves to hide your fingerprints. But you dropped one. It was found with traces of gardenia." She shook her head. "No, you wore gardenia perfume. I didn't. And the photograph. You found it. You used it. You recreated the smile. You forced it on his dead face. You wanted us to know, to see." Her voice broke. He deserved it." Poirot said nothing, not for a long moment. "The law, mademoiselle, it will deal with you. But know this, the smile, it betrayed you. Because no man smiles in death unless someone makes him." She wept. And then Poirot stood, his face grave. "Justice," he said quietly, "is not always elegant. But truth has symmetry." As the rain finally ceased, Poirot walked the empty hall of the Belmonde, his reflection following in silence. "Ah," he whispered to himself, "the human heart. It hides poison more potent than any vial." And the clock struck midnight. Chapter 2. Blood beneath the ballroom floor. The tap, tap, tap of the dripping blood echoed through the cavernous space, softer than a whisper, yet heavier than any scream. Beneath the Belmonde's grand ballroom, beneath its marble and music, past velvet curtains and polished waltzes, something was bleeding, and the blood was not fresh. "Good God," gasped Arlen, as the floorboard gave a low groan beneath his polished boot, then sank ever so slightly. The scent that rose from the crack was iron, old and metallic. Poirot knelt beside it without a word, his gloved fingers trailing the edge where the plank had shifted. He did not need to speak. He had seen enough death to know when it was waiting to be remembered. "Bring a crowbar," he said quietly, "and be gentle. What lies beneath has been forgotten long enough." Moments later, the floor was lifted. Dust, darkness, and decay greeted them. And then bones. Human. Jagged, partial, long buried, curled in on themselves like a secret unwilling to be told. But even more chilling was the glint of something silver tucked beside the skeleton. A cigarette case engraved with a single initial, F. "Felix Hartmore," Arlen muttered. "But we just buried him yesterday." "Precisely," Poirot said, his voice tightening. "Which means this is not him. This is someone who died before, perhaps someone he replaced. The discovery shook the foundation of every assumption they had. It was no longer a matter of murder. It was a matter of identity. Who was buried beneath the ballroom floor? And more urgently, what connection did it have to the smile that shouldn't have existed? Poirot sat alone that evening in his room, sipping a tisane as the storm gathered again outside. A body beneath a floor is not hidden, he mused aloud, unless it was meant to be forgotten. But people do not forget so easily. They remember. Sometimes in silence, sometimes in guilt. He closed his eyes. The Belmond Hotel had a past. A long, elegant, sordid past. Built on opulence, yes, but also on scandal. It was not its first murder. Poirot could feel it in the walls, in the cold that came not from the rain, but from secrets left to rot. He began with the hotel archives. The Belmond had been closed for renovations 5 years ago, extensive, costly, and curiously undocumented. The ballroom had been rebuilt, floors replaced, columns repainted. But why? There had been no mention of damage or decay. Poirot's little grey cells stirred. He summoned the architect responsible, Mr. Bertrand Noirel, a man whose record was spotless, whose speech was rehearsed, and whose eyes darted whenever the name Felix was mentioned. "I simply followed orders," Noirel said, his voice oily. "The hotel board asked for updates. We modernized the foundation, strengthened the flooring. Purely structural." "Ah, but did you perhaps notice anything buried beneath those floors? Bones, maybe? A cigarette case?" Noirel laughed, but it was the laugh of a man who had practiced it. "Certainly not, monsieur. We removed old pipes. Nothing more." Poirot tilted his head. "Then why, may I ask, did you sign the off-record expense ledger for emergency removal the same week the ballroom was sealed?" Noirel stiffened. I don't recall." "Then I suggest you begin recalling, monsieur. For the past, it bleeds into the present." Poirot left him with trembling hands and a lie half swallowed. Daphne Vale, who had remained at the Belmond under the pretext of grief, was next. She had been quiet since the first murder. Too quiet. And her bags, Poirot noticed, had not been touched since the day after the funeral. She was not preparing to leave. She was waiting. In the music salon, Poirot found her, bowing her violin without sound, eyes fixed on the stained glass windows. "There was another man," she whispered before he even spoke. "Before Felix, he vanished." Poirot nodded slowly. "You were in love?" She gave the faintest of nods. "His name was Henry Fortescue. A pianist. He played here. Then, one day, he disappeared. They said he ran away, but I never believed that." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Henry Fortescue, F. The cigarette case." Daphne turned pale. "He always carried it, silver, with an engraving." "So," Poirot murmured, "this is not one mystery, but two." He questioned more of the staff. A housemaid remembered Henry. Quiet, kind, always watching the upper guests from afar. The head chef recalled him too. "Had an argument with Mr. Braxby, I believe. Something about stolen music." Poirot's ears perked. Braxby again. He cornered Braxby that evening in the bar. "You knew Henry Fortescue?" "I knew of him," Braxby said stiffly. "You stole from him." What?" Poirot leaned closer. "A play, a score, something of value. And when he confronted you, he vanished. That's preposterous." "Is it? You were jealous of Hartmore, of Fortescue, of any man who shined brighter than you." Braxby's eyes burned. "You have no proof." No, Poirot said calmly, but I have motive, and a pattern. He turned on his heel and left Bracksby in silence. Poirot's final conversation that night was with Madame Celeste Duval. She wore her grief now like a crown, every gesture perfect, every sigh rehearsed. You knew both men, Poirot said. Felix and Fortescue. She sipped her wine. Knew? One seduced me, the other composed for me. Men orbit women like me, Monsieur Poirot. It is what they do. And when one betrayed you, what did you do? She smiled thinly. I erased him. Poirot met her gaze without flinching. Do not joke, madame. Erasure is a crime when the result is a corpse. She set the glass down. I don't joke. I just move on. Poirot rose slowly. And corpses, madame, they do not. 2 days later, the final twist emerged. Poirot returned to the ballroom one last time. The body beneath the floor had been identified. Dental records confirmed it. Henry Fortescue. But it was not until Poirot inspected the hotel's internal logs, handwritten records from the staff quarters, that he saw it. An entry dated 5 years ago. Private rehearsal for Mademoiselle, Vale and Mr. Fortescue, ballroom, midnight, and beneath it, scribbled hastily, sound of struggle, blood, floor cracked, covered next day. Poirot knew. He summoned everyone. Guests, staff, suspects, all to the ballroom. He stood in the center, beneath the chandelier, the storm again, pounding against the windows. Murder is not a single act, he said, voice rising. It is a chain, and every lie is another link. He turned to Daphne. You and Fortescue loved in secret. He composed for you. You planned to debut the piece here, but Mr. Bracksby learned of it. He stole the work. Fortescue confronted him. Poirot turned. And you struck him, didn't you, Bracksby? In anger, in panic. Bracksby said nothing. But you did not kill him. Poirot walked to Celeste. You found them. Arguing. Perhaps Fortescue told you the truth. Perhaps he mocked you. But you had motive. Betrayal. Rage. And access. You knew the room would be empty. You knew the floor was weak. You struck. She stood slowly. And what if I did? Poirot did not blink. Then you murdered one man and fell for another. And when that man, Felix, began to suspect, began to blackmail, you killed again, with poison, you placed the flower, you staged the smile. The room went silent. Celeste smiled. You have no proof. Poirot stepped forward. Ah, but I do. The gloves found beneath the floor, the gardenia perfume, and this. He held up a letter, a confession. From the architect, Bertrand Noirel, blackmailed by Celeste into sealing the floor, paid handsomely to silence what she buried. Celeste's face collapsed. Poirot said nothing more. He simply turned and walked away as the rain fell harder. Outside the ballroom, Arlen joined him. It's over then? No, Poirot said softly. It never is. A man dies, a woman kills, another lies. The blood remains, even when scrubbed. Beneath every polished floor is a truth someone tried to bury. And he walked on, alone, into the night. Chapter 3. A toast before murder struck. The champagne glass shattered before it touched the ground, its contents already laced with death. A scream followed, short and sharp like the crack of a pistol, and then silence, thick and terrible, settled over the Belmonde's ballroom like a curtain falling at the end of a tragedy. Hercule Poirot, who had been only steps away, turned slowly, his eyes not yet on the body, but on the gloved hand that held the champagne flute a moment too long. It trembled, just barely, an actor forgetting the next line. It was at the gala, honoring the reopening of the hotel's historic West Wing, a gilded affair with pressed uniforms, silk gloves, and the faint scent of power and perfume. But beneath the chandeliers, amidst the jazz and silver laughter, a murder had waited for its cue. Now it had taken center stage. The victim was Ambrose Vexley, a financial magnate whose presence could turn shareholders silent and whose scandals, whispered and half-proven, filled the society pages of half a dozen papers. He had raised his glass. To renewal, he'd said, and then collapsed before the word had left his lips. His lips, Poirot noted, bore the faintest foam at the corners, and his eyes, always hard, always calculating, now stared upward, blank and surprised, as if even death had arrived too soon for him. Poirot moved before the panic could grow. Nobody moves. Nobody leaves. The truth, mesdames et messieurs, it is in the details, and the details are in the stillness. Inspector Arlen arrived minutes later, pale and winded. "Poison?" he asked quietly, examining the glass. Poirot nodded. "But it was not in the champagne bottle. I checked it myself. The poison was added after the pour. Someone made certain only Mr. Vexley drank it." "Targeted," Arlen said. "We. This was not an act of chance. It was a performance. There were, of course, suspects. There are always suspects where wealth and secrets mix. Suspect 1. Clara Vexley, the widow. 30 years younger than Ambrose, stunning in emerald silk, her face painted with grief, but not quite smeared. Her past was a mosaic of high society parties and discreet silences. She had married Ambrose for stability, she once said, and in return she received diamonds and humiliation. Suspect 2. Julius Crowe, the business partner, known for his charm, his bright blue tie, and his thinly veiled resentment. There were whispers that Ambrose was going to force Julius out of the firm before the year's end. Whispers that Julius himself had tried to push a merger that Ambrose killed, along with his reputation. Suspect 3. Esme Devon, the young journalist with a notebook always in hand and a past tied to the Vexley estate. She had written a scathing exposé on Ambrose's business dealings that nearly ruined her career when he threatened libel. She had motive, access, and a pen filled with venom. Poirot, ever elegant, ever observant, began with the widow. "Madame," he said gently, "how long have you known the champagne was from Vexley's private cellar?" Clara blinked, her eyes red but dry. I didn't. He chose the bottle himself, from the old Chateau Belcourt crate." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "And yet, you recommended it to the sommelier, did you not?" "I may have. It was tradition." "Tradition," he repeated softly. "Curious thing, tradition. It can be sentimental or strategic." He turned to leave, and noticed her gloves, silk, pale cream, and the faintest darkened edge on the fingertips. "Madame," he said, pausing, "have you recently handled charcoal? Or perhaps gunpowder?" Clara looked away. "I've been sketching. It helps with the nerves." But nerves do not kill husbands. Poison does." Next came Julius Crowe, who paced the hallway like a caged wolf, his eyes flicking toward the exit and back. "You were close to him," Poirot said. "He was a monster," Julius snapped. "A brilliant, money-obsessed, manipulative monster. But I didn't kill him." "Of course not," Poirot agreed calmly. "You only benefited from his death. Control of the firm. No questions asked. You're twisting things." Non, monsieur, I am merely arranging them. He caught something else, a paper in Julius's pocket. Poirot only glimpsed the heading, Last Will and Testament of Ambrose Vexley, dated 2 days before the gala. New will? Poirot inquired. Julius flinched. He changed it. Did he tell you who now inherits? No, but it concerned you enough to find it. It concerned me because I knew he'd do something petty. He always did. Poirot's silence was answer enough. Then came Esme Devon, found in the conservatory, typing madly into her notes. I told you, this place reeked of secrets, she said, barely looking up. Secrets, mademoiselle, are not inherently crimes, but sometimes they make the best motives. He destroyed my career, she said, flatly. But I didn't kill him. Poirot's eyes swept the desk. 3 pages of notes, one with a list of names. Clara, Julius, a butler named Holloway, and the word access underlined. You've been tracking his enemies. No, his enablers. Everyone who knew what he did and let him go on doing it. Poirot studied her closely. She did not fidget. She did not lie. But she did know something dangerous. Later that night, Poirot walked the ballroom alone. He moved through the crowd's memories as though through ghosts. Each footprint, each dropped napkin, each replaced glass had a story. And then he saw it. On the floor, near the serving cart. A small stain. Not wine, not champagne, ink. He followed it back to the edge of the dance floor, near the musician's corner. There, behind a velvet curtain, he found a tray, wiped but imperfectly. One glass had a faint rim of lip rouge, and a smell. Bitter almond. Cyanide. The glass was not part of the hotel's set. It had been brought in. Just one. Poirot stared at it. Ah, a toast indeed, but not in celebration. And then, the first twist. The will was altered. Not in Julius's favor. Not in Clara's. Not even in the firm's. It was left to someone unexpected. Someone not even in the room when Ambrose died. To Esme Devon. Poirot confronted her gently. You knew. Esme's face was pale. He sent me a letter, said he wanted to make amends. So he gave you everything? Yes. Did he say why? He said I had truth, that he wanted someone honest to start over. Poirot folded the letter. He never told Clara, never told Julius, but they found out. She stared. So it was one of them? Perhaps. But let us not be so certain. Poirot's final clue came from the butler, Holloway, old, tired, but loyal. He asked me for the pen, Holloway said. Said he needed to change something. The will. What kind of pen? His fountain pen, the one with the gold nib. Poirot blinked. He used ink? Yes. Then why, monsieur, was there a typewritten copy of the will in Julius's pocket? The butler paled. I don't know. Because, Poirot said quietly, someone forged it. He gathered them all the next morning. In the library with the windows thrown open and the storm finally passed. Poirot stood by the fire, not moving. This was not a murder of passion, he began. It was a murder of inheritance and vanity. He turned to Julius. You altered the will. You forged the typewritten copy. You thought if Ambrose died before filing the original, the last copy found would be yours. Julius stood. That's insane. Poirot raised a hand. But you did not poison him. You had motive, yes, but not access. Not at that moment. He turned to Clara. You were his wife. You had the opportunity. the champagne tray, the gloves, but you hesitated. You intended to leave him, not kill him. Clara exhaled in disbelief. Poirot's eyes settled on the quietest one. Esme, you knew about the will. He trusted you, but you feared it was a trap, another game, so you acted first. You forged a signature. Then, fearing it wouldn't hold, you killed him, to seal your gain. Esme blinked, stunned. You can't prove. I don't have to. The poison, it was in your glass. The rouge marks. The glass you handed him yourself. During the toast, the ink spill. From your pen, not his. You wrote the false witness statement too, didn't you? She broke. I had nothing. He ruined my name. He toyed with me. And then he thought he could give me charity. I wasn't going to be pitied. Poirot said nothing. The room was still. And then he whispered, "Ah, mademoiselle, the truth, it arrives like the cork from a shaken bottle, violent, messy, and always expected." As Esme was taken away, Poirot turned to Arlen. She wanted justice, but what she served was vengeance. And vengeance, Monsieur l'Inspecteur, it never tastes as sweet as champagne. And somewhere behind them, the music played on. Chapter 4. The Widow Who Didn't Cry. She sat perfectly still in the front pew, her veil unlifted, her hands folded in her lap, like two ivory sculptures. Not a tear, not a tremble, not even the shallow rise of breath that grief demands. And when the priest paused mid-eulogy to gesture toward her, his beloved wife, the lady who shared his life for 15 years, there was no acknowledgement, not even a nod, just silence. And silence, Hercule Poirot knew, was often more deafening than a scream. The funeral of Reginald Bexley was modest but elegant, held beneath the Gothic arches of St. Dacian's Church, the sky outside heavy with grey. It was the sort of day that begged for mourning. Wind whistled through the high windows. Rain slicked the gravestones beyond. But only one thing chilled Poirot to the bone. Clarissa Bexley had not cried. "Grief wears many faces, mon ami," Poirot once told Hastings. "But when it wears no face at all, it is then that we must worry." For Clarissa's expression, serene, blank, untouched, betrayed no emotion, and Poirot, who had observed the subtlest ticks of guilt and panic in faces for decades, saw not sorrow, but calculation. Reginald Bexley, age 56, had died of a heart attack, or so said the coroner's preliminary report. No signs of struggle, no marks on the body, no clear evidence of foul play. And yet Poirot had been summoned by the late man's own solicitor, Mr. Edmund Trask, who had received, just 2 days before Bexley's death, a letter handwritten by Reginald himself. A letter that began, "If anything happens to me, do not believe the doctors. Look to my wife." It was not signed in fear. It was signed in certainty. Poirot's curiosity, as always, was piqued. He began his inquiries that very night at the Bexley estate, a manor perched on a cliff's edge overlooking the violent sea. The wind rattled the shutters. The fire in the drawing-room crackled, casting long shadows along the carved oak panels. Clarissa poured tea with perfect poise, her hands steady, her gaze unreadable. "He was unwell for months," she said softly. "Overworked, stressed. He refused to slow down." "And yet he feared for his life," Poirot replied. She smiled thinly. "He was prone to dramatics. You'll find no conspiracy here, Monsieur Poirot." "But the body says otherwise," Poirot murmured, watching her closely. "The coroner found nothing unusual, yes, but there was no autopsy. You insisted against it." My husband detested hospitals. He made me promise no knives, no invasions. Such devotion, Poirot said, with a tilt of the head. And yet you shed no tears. Clarissa set her cup down. Monsieur, grief does not always take the form you expect. I prefer solitude to spectacle. Poirot rose. So does the guilty. He departed with one phrase echoing in his mind. Look to my wife. But Clarissa was not the only one with secrets. There was Giles, Pendry, Reginald's business partner, sharp-jawed, slick-haired, always half-smiling. The kind of man who knew how to shake hands and sharpen knives in the same gesture. He met Poirot at the club, playing billiards beneath low, golden lamps. Tragic old Bexley going like that, Giles said. We'd just closed a new deal. New markets. Big expansion. Clarissa didn't seem too shaken, did she? Some say she is cold, Poirot said evenly. Some say she married for money, Giles shot back, smirking. But who am I to judge? Poirot studied him. Did you benefit from Mr. Bexley's passing? Giles blinked. Of course not. But his shares, did they not fall into the hands of the company, a clause in the partnership? Giles looked away. Temporarily? Until Clarissa claims them. Ah, Poirot murmured. How convenient. A window of opportunity. Giles leaned closer. You want to know who hated him? Talk to his daughter, Amelia. Amelia Bexley, daughter from Reginald's first marriage, lived in a cottage down the hill. She had not attended the funeral. She opened the door in paint-stained overalls, her hair wild and her eyes puffy, not from tears, but lack of sleep. You think he was murdered? She asked bluntly. Do you? Poirot returned. She hesitated. I think Clarissa didn't love him. I think she tolerated him until she could be free. You hated her. I hated that she pretended to be a saint, that she erased my mother's memory, that she wore black, not for mourning, but as a costume. And your father? Poirot asked gently. I loved him, she whispered, even when he disappointed me. But he didn't see her clearly, not until the end. Poirot asked to see Reginald's study. She nodded. The study was still locked, still dusted, still arranged. But Poirot's eyes landed on three things. First, the drawer, scratched near the keyhole as if opened hastily and often. Second, the decanter, half full, of brandy, unusually dark in color. And third, the fireplace, a recent burn, not of logs, but of paper. He used his handkerchief to extract a corner scrap from the grate. The ink was smeared, but legible. Phytotoxin. Ah, Poirot whispered. The heart. It is easily stopped when one knows how to still it. He sent the bottle for chemical testing. 2 days later, confirmation. Digitalis. A poison derived from foxglove. Slow, subtle, and easily missed in an aging man with heart issues. Poirot convened all three suspects at the estate. The wind howled outside. Thunder rolled. The clock ticked louder than ever. He began with Giles. You knew the shares reverted temporarily to you. A clever arrangement, but you assumed the death would be ruled natural. You did not poison him, but you benefited. Giles fidgeted. So, that's not a crime. No, Poirot said softly, but greed often leads to proximity. He turned to Amelia. You loved your father, but you hated what he had become, and perhaps you wished for closure. Amelia shook her head. I wanted to paint, not kill. Poirot did not respond. Not yet. Finally, he faced Clarissa. You were patient, controlled, dignified. But your husband was changing his will, giving more to Amelia, less to you. Clarissa did not blink. You used his habits against him, Poirot said. Brandy before bed, a few drops of tincture, night after night, slowly weakening the heart, until nature could take the blame. And yet, Clarissa said softly, you have no proof. Poirot opened a small box and revealed a vial, empty, but labeled. It had been found in her dressing-table drawer, beneath silk scarves and lavender sachets. She stared. You were careful, Poirot said, but not perfect. Amelia spoke suddenly. Wait, that vial, she always claimed it was perfume. Poirot raised his brow. No, it once held poison. Clarissa's mask cracked for the first time. Do you want to know why I didn't cry? She said, her voice brittle. Because I had already mourned him for years. He strangled my youth, watched me like a guard, controlled everything I touched. He wasn't a man. He was a warden. Poirot nodded solemnly. And so, you freed yourself, slowly, quietly, with dignity. He turned away. The silence in the room was now complete. Later, Poirot stood by the window, rain tapping gently on the glass. Arlen stood beside him, stunned. She showed no remorse, the inspector said. Non, Poirot said softly, because remorse requires guilt. And some people do not kill out of hate, monsieur. They kill out of necessity, or what they believe to be necessity. She'll hang, Arlen muttered. Poirot said nothing for a long time, and then he whispered, a woman who does not cry for her husband is not always a killer, but when she watches him die with dry eyes and steady hands, she is no longer a widow. She is something else entirely, and in the darkness behind them, the wind cried in her place. When Poirot arrived, candlelight dancing on brass railings, a cold fog pressing against the arched windows, he paused at the threshold, not to speak, but to think. The door had been locked from the inside. No windows were broken, no secret panels were visible. And yet, the man was undeniably dead. The impossible had happened, which, to Poirot, meant only one thing. Someone had made the impossible appear inevitable. The victim's name was Dr. Lionel Thwaite, a chemist of some renown, quiet, meticulous, and reclusive. He had checked into the Belmont 2 days earlier with no luggage but a leather case and a small wooden box. Both were missing. His body was found beside a toppled armchair, a slit across the throat so precise it could have been surgical. And yet, there were no footprints, no blood trails, nothing. Only silence and the faint ticking of the brass carriage clock on the mantelpiece, 5 seconds slow. Poirot noted, and deliberately so. Locked room mystery, muttered Inspector Arlen as he rubbed his temple. I loathe them. Always ghosts or trapdoors. Non, mon ami, Poirot murmured, adjusting the flower in his lapel. There are no ghosts, only egos clever enough to vanish. Poirot bent low beside the corpse. No sign of struggle, no defensive wounds. The blood had pooled neatly, as if orchestrated. The window was latched. The fireplace had been recently used, though the room held no scent of smoke. And then, a clue. A scratch, nearly invisible, beneath the side table's leg. The rug had been moved. Poirot's fingers found the faint drag mark, a circle. Something heavy had been repositioned, after the murder. Aha, he whispered. Someone danced with the scene, but forgot the rhythm. He turned to the staff. 3 individuals had been near room 207 that night. First, Miss Verity Blanc, a ballet dancer turned society darling. She claimed to have passed the hallway en route to her sweet I heard a gramophone playing, she said, some dreadful old waltz, and then it stopped suddenly, just before midnight. Her alibi? She'd been on the phone in the lobby for nearly half an hour. Confirmed, but suspiciously timed. Second, Mr. Regan Bouchard, the hotel's maintenance man. Rough hands, unshaven, a limp from a forgotten war. I was on the roof, mending the gutters. Storm's coming, he grunted. Didn't hear nothing. And yet his name was in the maintenance logbook for room 207 earlier that day. Third, Mrs. Penelope Maddox, a novelist famous for her mystery thrillers and more famous for the scandals she never quite denied. She had been seen at dinner with Thwaite 2 nights ago, deep in conversation. He wanted to consult me about poisons, she told Poirot, lighting a cigarette with unsteady fingers. It was harmless. Just research. Ah, Poirot replied smoothly. But research into murder, madame, is never entirely harmless. Return to the scene with a magnifier and fresh gloves. He inspected the fireplace. There, beneath the grate, lay a half-burned page, mathematical symbols, strange characters, something scientific, perhaps even alchemical. He recognized Thwaite's handwriting, rigid, upright, written with a ruler's discipline. Poirot spoke to himself softly. A man of logic, a man of detail, a man who feared someone enough to barricade himself into solitude. But fear, it blinds the senses, no? He trusted the walls more than people. And people, Poirot knew, were always the true danger. He walked the hotel late that night, reflecting on the facts. The door was locked, the window sealed, the crime surgical, the items missing, and always the missing gramophone. Where had the music come from? Poirot sat at the piano in the Belmonde's grand lobby. He struck the keys softly. A melody came back to him, a waltz, the same one Verity claimed to have heard. He hummed the tune, matching it with the burned page. A cipher, a musical code. Mon Dieu, he whispered. He hid the formula in sound. The next morning brought a twist. The hotel manager found Thwaite's leather case, abandoned in the staff stairwell. Inside were broken vials, a photograph of Verity Blanc dancing at the Opéra de Paris, and a single scrap of paper with the words, "She moves with poison." Poirot confronted Verity. He was obsessed, she snapped. Not romantically, he thought. I was something I'm not. A thief? Poirot asked gently. A courier. He believed I was working for someone. Were you? She said nothing. Then, he was paranoid. He kept watching me, asking questions. He believed the government was chasing him, that he'd created something he couldn't control. Poirot narrowed his eyes. You mean a weapon? She looked away. Poirot met with Mrs. Maddox that afternoon. The author poured 2 cups of tea, but drank from neither. Thwaite asked if a character could fake a locked-room suicide, she said. I told him no. There's always a flaw. And did he find it? Poirot asked. I think he became it, she whispered. That night, Poirot found the final clue. In the maintenance shaft outside room 207, barely accessible, was a grate that had been unscrewed and refastened just once. A long, narrow corridor stretched between the walls. Not enough for a full-grown man, but enough to slip a hand through, enough to place a phonograph, enough to remove one too. Poirot summoned everyone at dawn. The storm had broken, rain striking the glass like a metronome. Lightning flashed behind the drapes as he spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, this was not merely a murder. It was an erasure, a vanishing act. But no act is perfect. He turned to Verity. You knew Thwaite. He followed you. He suspected you of stealing his research. He was wrong. Then, to Regan Bouchard. You had access to the vent. You repaired it. You left your tool behind, but you did not kill. And then, Poirot faced Mrs. Maddox. You told him it was impossible. You challenged him, and then you helped him prove it. A stunned silence. You see, Poirot continued, Thwaite did not die by another's hand. He died by his own. Gasps rippled. He slit his throat deliberately. He created the locked room illusion not to escape justice, but to immortalize himself as the victim of the perfect crime. Poirot paced. He placed the phonograph in the shaft. He sealed the room. He timed everything. But then he sent a message, a burned cipher, a melody, a clue, because he did not want to disappear completely. He wanted someone to solve him. He lifted the broken photograph. This woman, he said, pointing to Verity, was not his target. She was his muse, his warning. He believed the science he had uncovered was too dangerous to fall into enemy hands. Poirot sighed. So he became a ghost. Verity spoke softly. Then why frame me? He didn't. He thought you would understand. He thought I would. And Madame Maddox, he trusted you to record it, to write the story. But you, he said, locking eyes with her, you took it too far. You finished it. She froze. You cleaned the room after he died. You moved the rug. You removed the phonograph. You believed you were preserving his genius. But what you did was commit interference. And that, madame, is the real crime. Mrs. Maddox broke down. He was brilliant and broken. Poirot folded his hands. Yes, but even a broken mind leaves cracks behind. As the police escorted her away, Poirot stood alone once more at the scene. He whispered to himself, a locked room. Non, mon ami. Only a mind desperate to lock the truth away. But the truth, it always finds a key. And outside, the morning sun finally broke through the storm. Chapter 6. The butler heard a whisper. The whisper drifted through the hallway like the last breath of a dying man, thin, broken, and not meant to be heard. Yet the butler did hear it. Just past midnight, as the old grandfather clock groaned its 12th stroke, and the manor's silence curled into something unnatural. Holloway paused mid-step, a silver tray balanced in his hand, and turned his head toward the voice. There was no one there, no living soul, only the sound, a name, barely audible. A whisper rasped from a throat now cold, and the name was his own. When Hercule Poirot arrived at Dunlow Hall the next morning, the rain had already begun its slow assault on the countryside. The gravel crunched beneath his polished shoes as he stepped out of the car, greeted not by warm welcomes, but by stiff faces and dark umbrellas. The master of the house, Sir Lennox Marshwood, had been found dead in his study. Slumped at his desk, an overturned inkwell had bled across the ledger like a wound. The cause, by all appearances, a single, clean shot to the chest. A pistol lay beside the hand. But the gun was wiped clean, and there were no fingerprints, none at all, not even Sir Lennox's. Poirot's sharp eyes swept the room. Leather-bound books, the scent of old smoke in the curtains, a Scotch bottle, half-drunk, yet missing its stopper, a chessboard near the hearth, with one black knight removed and placed atop a book of poetry. Odd, poetic, no signs of a struggle, no signs of robbery, and yet Poirot's moustache twitched with unease. The door was locked when I arrived with the morning paper, Holloway said, voice steady but pale around the edges. But I heard something, just before the clock struck 12, a whisper, faint but clear. And what, Monsieur Holloway, did the whisper say? My name, nothing more. Poirot paused. A voice from beyond, or perhaps a memory trying to surface. Sir Lennox was a man with few friends and many heirs, a wealthy recluse, twice married, with a family fractured by inheritance and ambition. 3 suspects stood out before Poirot even warmed his hands by the fire. First, Camilla Marshwood, the daughter from Lennox's first marriage, a woman of cold composure and calculating eyes. She had returned to Dunlow after years abroad, claiming reconciliation, but bringing with her a bitter silence that refused to thaw. She stood at the window now, arms crossed, eyes dry. He didn't trust anyone, she said softly, especially me, and I never wanted his money. Then what did you want, mademoiselle? Poirot asked gently. To see him regret, she replied. And he did. I made sure of it. Second, Victor Kersey, the nephew and sole remaining male heir, a man who had gambled away his inheritance before it was ever granted. He had been seen arguing with Sir Lennox the evening before, voices raised loud enough to shake the glass of the wine cellar below. He accused me of stealing from him, Victor scoffed, said I was a leech, but I've done my penance. Oui, Poirot mused, but did you wish to end the punishment permanently? Victor bristled. I'm not clever enough to plan a murder. On the contrary, monsieur, Poirot replied smoothly, the murderer is often exactly as clever as he needs to be. Third, Eloise Marshwood, the young second wife, 30 years Lennox's junior. She had married him during an illness no one expected him to survive. Yet he recovered, only to become suspicious, reclusive, and some whispered paranoid. He thought everyone was watching him, Eloise told Poirot, dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Even me. He changed his will weekly, burned letters, locked his study at night. And you? Poirot asked. I merely tried to keep him calm. Poirot's gaze lingered on her. Yet calm is not the state in which one dies of a gunshot. The investigation turned upon a single impossibility, the whisper. The study was sealed, the windows shut. The only witness, a butler known for discretion, not delusion. Poirot re-entered the study. The chessboard drew his attention again. One black knight removed. The book beneath it, The Tempest, opened to a page with a single line underlined. Hell is empty, and all the devils are here. Poirot closed the book gently. A message, perhaps, but not from Sir Lennox. In the fireplace, Poirot found a scrap of paper only half consumed, the ink blurred but legible. Rewrite the codicil before, and a name. Eloise. Ah, Poirot said, not all devils come with horns. Some arrive in silk. Later that evening, Poirot gathered each of the suspects in the drawing room. The fire crackled, the wind clawed at the windows. Camilla sat with arms folded. Victor paced. Eloise watched Poirot with that curious, detached grace that unnerved even the inspector. I have determined, Poirot began softly, that Sir Lennox was indeed murdered. The gun had no fingerprints. The study was locked. And yet, someone entered, or someone never left. Gasps. Poirot pointed to the bookcase. Behind this wall is a narrow service corridor, forgotten by most, used long ago for heating maintenance. It opens from inside. He tapped the panel, and with a groan, it shifted. A hidden space revealed. Someone used this corridor to enter and exit. Perhaps not recently, but the smell, old smoke and something acidic. I found traces of oil used in old firearms. And this, he held up a stopper engraved with the Marshwood crest, missing from the Scotch bottle, found in the ashes of the fireplace, used perhaps to silence the shot. Victor shook his head. That's insane. No, Poirot said. It is clever, but flawed. He turned to Camilla. You argued with him, yes. You despised him, but you are not the killer. He turned to Victor. You are reckless, but not methodical. Then he turned to Eloise. You, madame, were always in the room. She blinked. What do you mean? You married him for comfort, not love. But he changed. He became paranoid, suspicious. He intended to cut you from the will. You had motive. But I was in my room, she protested. Yes, but Holloway heard a whisper. His name, not shouted, but repeated. Poirot stepped closer. You whispered his name, knowing it would unsettle him, knowing he would investigate. And when he found the body, you wanted him to think it a warning. Holloway gasped. She knew I walked the corridor at midnight. Poirot nodded. And you, madame, had the key to the corridor. A copy made, the scrap of paper in the fire. You wrote it. You tried to change the will, and when he refused, you silenced him. Eloise stood, rage igniting. He was going to ruin me. But you ruined yourself, Poirot said calmly. And the night removed? You were playing a game you did not understand. As she was taken away, the butler approached Poirot quietly. Why whisper my name? Poirot looked at him gently. Because she needed to confuse you. A witness who saw nothing but heard everything. Poirot turned to the fire, his voice low. There are many kinds of silence. But the dead, Monsieur Holloway, they speak most often in whispers. And behind them, the clock struck once, soft, mournful, and final. Chapter 7. A photograph nobody took. The photograph slid from the envelope like a whisper from the grave. Black and white, slightly curled at the edges. And in its center, unmistakably, stood a man who had died 3 days before. He was not alone. Behind him loomed a figure with a gloved hand reaching toward his shoulder, half obscured by shadow, face turned just out of frame. The date scrawled on the back confirmed what Hercule Poirot already suspected. The image was taken after the man's alleged time of death, but there was no photographer, no camera on the premises, and no logical explanation. Only one question lingered like smoke. Who took the photograph nobody remembered? Poirot turned the glossy print over in his hands as candlelight flickered across the walls of the Belmonts' drawing room. Outside, the wind clawed at the glass. Rain tapped a rhythm against the window panes like a metronome counting down a secret. The image had been delivered, anonymously, addressed to Poirot in careful block lettering. No fingerprints, no scent, no trace of the sender. Only the picture, its clarity unnerving, as if it had captured something the living were not meant to see. The dead man was Ernest Hargrave, a retired war photographer, known as much for his ferocity in the field as for the enemies he'd made in peace. He had been found in his darkroom, head slumped against the enlarger, eyes wide open, glass shards in his palms. A broken bulb above, an electrical cord twisted like a serpent around his ankle. Accident, the coroner had said. Death by electrocution. Simple, tragic, closed. But Poirot never believed in simplicity. especially when the dead seemed to leave behind photographs of themselves, taken after their final breath. The room had been locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. All chemicals accounted for. But one thing had been dismissed by the police: a roll of undeveloped film tucked into the lining of Hargrave's old satchel. Poirot had it processed. The result? This photograph. And with it came the mystery that defied time, logic, and truth. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered, his brow furrowed. Either someone has tampered with the record of the dead, or the dead, they refuse to be forgotten. Hargrave had been staying at the Belmond for over a month. A recluse, he took his meals in silence and wandered the property at odd hours. He trusted no one, and now he was dead, caught in a photograph he shouldn't be in. There were 3 people of particular interest to Poirot. Each had a tie to Hargrave. Each had been close on the night of his death, and each had reason to see him gone. First was Lilith Morven, Hargrave's former apprentice. Pale, sharp-eyed, and brilliant with light exposure, she now worked as a freelance photojournalist, but had always remained in Hargrave's shadow. Their last known conversation had ended in shouting. She claimed he stole her work. He claimed she stole his negatives. "I didn't kill him," she said, when Poirot found her smoking behind the conservatory. "He destroyed himself long ago. I only ever wanted my name on what I'd created." "Ah," Poirot replied gently, "but ambition, mademoiselle, is a flame that can burn both creator and muse." Then came Clive Sedley, an art dealer whose reputation for procuring rare photographs teetered on the edge of legality. He had arranged a private viewing of Hargrave's portfolio 2 days before the death. No deal had been made. "He changed his mind," Sedley said with a shrug. "Said some of his negatives were too dangerous to sell. What does that even mean?" Poirot nodded. "It means that perhaps the truth is more valuable than the art." "And lastly, Doctor, Clara Northcott, a psychiatrist staying at the hotel on retreat. She had spent several evenings speaking with Hargrave in the lounge, always out of earshot, always intense. He was tormented, she admitted. Not by what he'd done, but by what he'd seen. He told me. He believed someone was following him. Not in the flesh, but in his photographs. A figure that appeared in images he never remembered taking. Poirot froze. "A figure?" he asked. "Describe it." "A man, or maybe a silhouette. Sometimes a hand, always in shadow, always behind him." A chill crept through Poirot's spine. He returned to the photograph and magnified it. The hand on Hargrave's shoulder. No reflection in the glass window behind them. No trace of the photographer's shadow. Just the ghost of presence. Later that night, Poirot examined the negatives again. He found 6 exposures in total. Only one had been developed by the anonymous sender. The other 5, images of empty rooms, corridors, the hotel garden at dusk, but in the 4th frame, there it was again, a blur in the mirror. The same hand. He looked closer. In the edge of the jewel frame, Lilith's coat. He questioned her again. "I don't know who sent the photograph," she said, "but I didn't take it." "Did you ever see this figure? The one Hargrave feared?" Lilith hesitated. "Once, in his dark room, I thought it was a reflection. But it didn't move when he did." Poirot's mind spun. He returned to the scene of the death. The dark room was cold, sterile, shelves of chemicals. The enlarger stood like a watchtower over the place where Hargrave had died. Poirot knelt near the power source. The frayed cord was cleanly sliced, not frayed by accident, but cut. Beneath the table, Tucked into a crack, he found a charred piece of photographic paper. A faint image emerged, Hargrave's face, distorted. But in the background, again, that hand. "Non," Poirot whispered. "Not a phantom. A person." He examined the prints under ultraviolet light. A watermark. Faint, invisible to the naked eye. A studio mark. Not Hargrave's, but Lilith's. The twist came quickly. Sedley had paid Lilith, not for photographs, but for the originals Hargrave had hidden. She had found some in the lining of his old camera bag. She delivered them. One of them, Sedley recognized and destroyed. It depicted a government official in a compromising position. A blackmail photograph, one worth killing for. Poirot cornered Sedley. "You wanted more," Poirot said. "You demanded the undeveloped roles." "I never—" "No, you did. And when Hargrave refused, you threatened him. He feared you, but not enough to destroy the negatives." Sedley folded. "I didn't kill him," he muttered, "but you were not alone in your desires." Poirot assembled the suspects in the lounge. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, silence fell. "This was a murder by fear," Poirot began. "A man haunted not by ghosts, but by guilt, and hunted by those who wanted to silence his past." He turned to Dr. Northcott. "You understood his paranoia. You listened, but you also planted seeds." She flinched. "I tried to help him." "No, you tried to retrieve something. Information. Perhaps you were not who you claimed to be." He held up a badge. Intercepted mail. A different identity. MI5. "You feared what Hargrave had. Evidence. Secrets. So you monitored him, but you did not kill." Poirot turned to Lilith. "You loved your mentor, and you hated him. You felt stolen from. You gave Sedley what he wanted, but when Hargrave learned, he confronted you." Lilith shook her head. "I didn't." "But you did. You snapped. You cut the cord. You left the room dark. You wanted to frighten him. But the shock, it killed him. Accidental. But you did not call for help." The room was silent. "And the photograph?" Poirot asked. "Not taken by a ghost, taken by a self-timer. Hargrave, in fear, was documenting every hour. That image was his own." Lilith broke. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted him to stop. He made me feel invisible." Poirot nodded solemnly. "Yet in your crime, mademoiselle, you made him immortal." As the police escorted her away, Poirot lingered at the photograph once more. "A picture captures truth," he whispered. "But sometimes it reveals the parts of ourselves we wish never to see." And behind him, the storm finally passed. Chapter 8. Her alibi was too perfect. The scream echoed through the winter air like a razor slicing silk, shattering the quiet of Belmont's east wing just as the first flakes of snow began to fall. In room 314, the body of George Arkwright, prominent shipping magnate and financier of half the coastal estates in the county, lay face down in a shallow pool of blood. The window was open. A frost-bitten breeze danced through the curtains, but the truly chilling detail was this. Every clock in the room, including the one on Arkwright's wrist, read exactly 7:47 p.m. Not a minute sooner, not a second late. The scene, Hercule Poirot knew immediately, had not merely been staged, it had been choreographed. He did not speak as he stepped into the room, only observed. The timepieces, of course, the whiskey glass, filled but untouched, the ashtray with a single crushed cigarette, filter end bitten, a habit Arkwright was known to have abandoned a decade ago. The gramophone still spun slowly, as if the music had died along with the man. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah," he murmured, "too clean, too elegant, too perfect." By the time Inspector Arlen arrived, Poirot had already sent for 3 individuals. Lady Evelyn Rothmore, a poised widow with a voice like velvet and a reputation so polished it bordered on myth. Malcolm Fincher, Arkwright's volatile business partner whose loyalty was as flexible as the stock market. And Dr. Elise Hartley, a psychologist who had been staying at the hotel under the pretense of a silent retreat. She was also the only person to have spoken with Arkwright the day he died. But it was Evelyn's alibi that caught Poirot's attention like a thorn beneath silk. She had not only claimed to be in the hotel lounge at the precise moment of death, she had documented it, signed her name in the guest ledger at 7:47 p.m., corroborated by 2 staff members, had tea stains on her glove, and had been seated under the watchful gaze of a painter rendering hotel portraits. A perfect alibi, too perfect. The first act, as always, was chaos. Arkwright's death sent shockwaves through the guest list. Whispers spiraled like smoke. Everyone knew of his wealth. Fewer knew the enemies he quietly made. Poirot listened to every footstep, every hesitation in breath, every glance not given. Then he returned to Evelyn. "Madame," he said with polite gravity, "your grief is refined. But grief, when sincere, often slips through the cracks." "I have not yet given myself permission to feel it," she replied. "George was a complicated man, but I assure you, I was nowhere near him when he died." Poirot tilted his head. "Indeed. Not near, not physically, but the distance, it can be constructed." She raised an eyebrow. "You don't believe me?" "I do not believe in perfection, madame. Not when a man lies dead." The second act unfolded with layers and illusions. Poirot turned to Fincher next. The man sweated guilt like a sponge. His voice trembled with misplaced anger. "He owed me money," Fincher admitted, "but I didn't kill him for it." "Yet the deal you arranged," Poirot replied, "the one to sell Arkwright's private fleet to the Montclair, that would have dissolved if he lived another week, n'est-ce pas?" Fincher blanched. "That's business." "No, that is opportunity painted in blood." Poirot then spoke with Dr. Hartley, who had been Arkwright's confidante for the last week. She claimed he was on the brink of an emotional collapse. "He feared something," she said, sipping her tea. "He told me someone from his past had returned. He wouldn't say who, just that she'd smile when she killed him." Poirot froze. "She?" "Yes. A woman. Someone he once hurt." Poirot's mind swirled. The cigarette, the timing, the gramophone, and then a twist. The photographer painting portraits in the lounge, a Mr. Linwood, admitted something curious. "Lady Evelyn?" he said. "Yes. She sat for me at 7:47. But oddly enough, her reflection in the window behind, it wasn't there when I sketched it. I thought it was the lighting. Now I'm not so sure." Poirot leaned in. "The reflection was missing?" "Exactly." Poirot's grey cells tingled. That night, he returned to room 314. The clocks, still frozen, at 7:47. But the watch on Arkwright's wrist, when rewound, stopped again at 7:32. A discrepancy. Poirot checked. The gramophone, the record, scratched to a loop, would have needed to be restarted manually. The cigarette filter, unlit. And the door, jammed from the inside, but not locked. A chair had been wedged against it. Poirot whispered to himself. The scene was staged, not just to mislead, but to trap time itself. The final act came the following morning. Poirot summoned the suspects once more. They gathered in the music room. The storm outside had turned to snow. Everything was white, still, breathless. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, the man George Arkwright did not die at 7:47 p.m. He died at 7:32. The watch on his wrist kept the true time. The rest, clock, gramophone, scene, was arranged by someone with a flair for details, someone who wanted to be seen somewhere else at the exact moment of his death. Poirot turned to Evelyn. Madame, your alibi was flawless. Too flawless. The tea, the gloves, the ledger, the witnesses. You created it. All a performance of innocence. Her expression did not waver. That is absurd. But it is precisely that perfection which reveals you, Poirot said softly. You staged the crime an hour before. You lit the cigarette, then crushed it cold. You placed the record to loop. You opened the window to preserve the illusion of recency. Then you left, quietly, and placed yourself where everyone could see you. He paused. And then you had someone else jam the door. The staff boy, tipped handsomely. He thought it was a prank. Gasps. Poirot continued. You were the woman Arkwright feared. Years ago in Cairo, you were known as Evelina Marden. He bankrupted your family. Your father drank himself to death. Your mother vanished. You changed your name, reinvented yourself, but the grief, it stayed. Evelyn's face darkened. He ruined us, and no one believed me. Poirot stepped forward. Revenge, madame. It is seductive, but it poisons the innocent. Along the way, tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but rage swallowed too long. And what now, Monsieur Poirot? She said softly. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the fireplace and watched the flames. You have crafted an alibi so perfect, he said, that it could only ever belong to the guilty. And when she was led away, he turned to the window, snow falling in quiet flurries. Ah, he murmured, human nature, Hastings. It never changes. It is not the lie that betrays us. It is the need for the lie to be perfect. Behind him, the clock struck 7:47 once more, and this time the moment felt honest. Chapter 9. The letter he burned alive. The fire hissed unnaturally, as if resisting the paper being fed into it. It sputtered, cracked, and in a final defiant flicker, the last corner of the letter, already curled and blackened, disintegrated into ash. Standing before the fireplace, Miles Denholm's face was pale, his hand trembling ever so slightly, though no one in the drawing-room noticed. No one but the man, seated quietly near the lamp, with his mustache perfectly balanced, and his mind, already several steps ahead. Hercule Poirot observed the flames with no expression, save for the faint narrowing of the eyes. A man who burns a letter that quickly, that urgently, is not eliminating clutter. He is eliminating evidence. It was the night before Denholm's sudden and most inconvenient death. Poirot had arrived at the cliffside estate of Glenrowan Manor at the invitation of a rather nervous solicitor, Mr. Penbury, who claimed his client had received a threat. The client was Miles Denholm, publisher, philanthropist, and to those who knew him more intimately, a man with more enemies than admirers. He had gathered his inner circle for a weekend of wine and reconciliation, though nothing about the guest list suggested peace. Among them, Celia Arkwell, a once celebrated poet whose most controversial work had been buried by Denholm's influence. Theodore Vance, an old school friend turned political rival, and Juliet Denholm, his wife. The letter had arrived by post. The night before Poirot, Denholm had read it silently, turned white, and without a word, walked to the fireplace and lit the match. He said it was nothing, but a man does not burn nothing while his fingers shake, and his wife watches him like a hawk behind crystal glass. Poirot's first instinct was clear. Someone wanted Denholm dead, and Denholm knew it. By morning, the deed was done. He was found slumped across his writing desk in the study, head tilted to the side, ink staining the sleeve of his dressing gown, a blotter pressed beneath his wrist like a final punctuation mark. The room was locked from the inside. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. A tumbler of brandy, untouched. One window open, letting in a salty draught from the sea below. And there, barely visible against the hearth, the last fragment of paper that had resisted the fire, charred at the edges, but with two hauntingly clear words remaining. You know. Poirot did not speak for a long while. Inspector Arlen, summoned as always, was prepared to rule it suicide. He was ill, Arlen said, waving at a stack of correspondence. Look at this letter to his physician. He feared his health was failing, couldn't sleep, complained of visions, melancholy. Poirot nodded once. But a man who fears death does not burn a warning. He clings to it. He shows it. A letter is not fuel unless it is evidence. He examined the study. Poirot noticed the typewriter. One key struck deeper than the rest. The ribbon, oddly worn on the right margin. A set of faint fingerprints on the carbon paper. A quill, unused, and a book left open on the floor. Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. The line underlined, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves." Poirot's little grey cells stirred. He began with Juliet Denholm. Composed, graceful, unreadable. "My husband was troubled," she said. "I asked him to rest, but he was consumed with whatever came in that letter." "You did not see it?" "No. He read it, then burned it." Poirot nodded. "And you?" "I was with Celia, playing chess. Ask her." Poirot did. Celia Arkwell's answers were clipped and dry. "Yes, we played. He came in, looked at us, walked to the fire, burned something. That's it." "And the letter?" Poirot asked. "I didn't see it," Celia replied. "But I know this. He deserved whatever it said." "Why so bitter, madame?" Celia's eyes sparked. "He silenced my career. Used legal threats to destroy my second book. Said it was immoral. It was about his affair." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "Truth masquerading as fiction." She smiled. "Exactly." Then there was Theodore Vance, polished, defensive. A man who had once called Denholm a brother and later accused him of corruption in the newspapers. "I was in my room," he said, voice clipped, "reading." "Alone?" "Yes." "What do you think the letter said?" "I imagine someone finally reminded him what kind of man he really was." Poirot's eyebrow rose. "And you?" "I hated him, but I didn't kill him." Poirot returned to the study that evening. The room smelled of ash and ink, and underneath the desk, a clue, a folded piece of carbon paper, slipped into the baseboard, nearly missed. Imprinted on it, faint but legible, a draft. "You cannot bury what breathes. If you don't come forward, I will. See." Poirot smiled. "Ah, so the letter was typed. And this is the ghost it left behind." He returned to Juliet. "Your husband received a typed threat," he said. He burned it, but the imprint remained. Juliet did not flinch. From whom? That is the question, madame. He called someone's bluff, but someone else called his. The first twist came when Poirot examined the typewriter, the pressure on the keys, the unique imprint of the Y. It matched a manuscript found in Celia's room. But Celia claimed she hadn't typed the letter. She's lying, Vance insisted when confronted. She had every reason to threaten him. We, Poirot said, but only one, to kill him. He gathered the 3 suspects in the drawing room at midnight. Candles flickered, the wind howled against the manor's windows, and Poirot, ever patient, began. The letter was a warning. Someone threatened to expose a secret from Dean Holmes' past, a crime, perhaps emotional, perhaps legal, but powerful enough to frighten him. He turned to Celia. You wrote the letter, but you did not kill. Celia's jaw tightened. Poirot turned to Vance. You despised him, but you are not precise. This crime was exact. Then to Juliet. Your alibi was solid, but you gave it too quickly. A perfect alibi is always suspicious. He held up the burnt fragment. You know, these words were for you, madame, not for him, because he discovered what you feared most. Juliet rose, eyes wide. What are you saying? That you wrote a second letter, one he never read aloud, because it was for someone else. The draft in the baseboard, typed with your hand, not Celia's. You used her manuscript as a shield. Silence. Poirot stepped closer. You had motive. You forged the first letter to look like a threat from Celia. But the second, you wrote in fear. You feared what Miles would do. He planned to leave you, to expose you. For what? She whispered. For falsifying accounts, embezzling from his charities. That's what you were hiding. Her hands shook. He confronted you that night. You killed him, not in rage, but in desperation. She sat down slowly. He wasn't supposed to open the letter. He said he never would. But he did. Poirot sighed. And a letter, madame, once burned, still whispers in the ashes. As Juliet was led away, the fire in the hearth died down. Poirot stood in the study alone. Letters, he said softly, are like confessions. Whether read or not, they speak. The heart knows when it has been betrayed. And so, eventually, does everyone else. Chapter 10. Death in the Garden of Guests. The scream cut through the air like a tear in silk, jarring, abrupt, and so shrill that the birds nesting in the laurels rose in a flurry of panic. A body lay twisted beneath the rose trellis, half hidden by shadows and ivy, his blood soaking into the carefully tended soil as though the earth itself had thirsted for it. The summer garden party, once a tableau of laughter and champagne, froze into tableau vivant. Guests suspended mid-toast, mid-lie, mid-step, staring in stunned silence at the death blooming where beauty had once grown. It was supposed to be a celebration, the unveiling of the new gardens at Belmont Estate, now restored to their Edwardian glory by the famed landscape architect Ambrose Langley. Socialites, investors, and old-money aristocrats had gathered beneath the white canopies, sipping elderflower cordial and gossiping beneath climbing roses. The air smelled of lavender, cut grass, and deceit. The music from the string quartet faltered mid-measure, then stopped altogether. The victim was Langley himself, a man of meticulous tastes, cruel wit, and a reputation for both genius and cruelty. He had vanished during the reception, only to be discovered 20 minutes later beneath a marble statue of Daphne, his head split by the very sundial he had personally commissioned. The weapon, a bronze garden stake, was found inches from his outstretched hand. Poirot stood among the guests, his hat perfectly angled, his moustaches unmoved by the sudden breeze. His expression, however, was unreadable. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "a murder most theatrical. To die in a garden designed by your own hand, it is the work of either irony or orchestration." Inspector Arlen arrived with his usual skepticism and a smudge of scone still on his collar. "Garden party murder," he muttered. "So civilized, it's practically polite." Poirot kneeled beside the body. "Not polite, mon ami. Calculated. The wound is clean. Too clean. And yet the blood pattern, it suggests movement. The blow was not sudden. He saw it coming. And did nothing. Perhaps he knew the hand that held the stake," Poirot said quietly. "Or perhaps he welcomed it." The guests were swiftly questioned, but Poirot had already narrowed his focus to three. First, Iris Langley, the victim's wife. Younger by nearly 20 years. Composed, always watching, but never watched. Her alibi was flawless. Surrounded by guests, she had been leading a tour of the herb garden when the scream rang out. "Ambrose had enemies," she said softly, "but he cultivated them like his roses, with sharp clippers and just enough sunlight." Second, Simon Greaves, Langley's protégé and design partner. Brooding, intense, and visibly shaken. "We argued this morning," he admitted. "He wanted to take full credit for the estate. He was going to cut me out of the firm." His hands trembled as he held his glass. "I wanted recognition, not revenge." "And yet," Poirot observed, "the two often travel hand in hand." Third, Lady Cynthia Belgrave, patroness of the Belmorne Restoration. Wealthy, entitled, and surprisingly blunt. "Ambrose was brilliant," she said, "but impossible. He threatened to withdraw his designs if I didn't increase his fee. Called me a parasitic debutante. I called him a weed." Poirot tilted his head. "And weeds, madame, are often removed, violently." As the sun began to lower, Poirot walked the garden alone. He observed the symmetry of the paths, the meticulous hedges, the way each bloom was selected for color and bloom time. It was not just a garden, it was a mind externalized. Langley had left his soul here, and someone had crushed it. Poirot's little grey cells whispered with unease. He examined the statue of Daphne, a small chip on the base. Fresh, the soil disturbed not in one place, but two. He knelt. "Aha," he murmured. The body was moved. Back in the manor, Poirot requested a copy of Langley's final design plans. They had been mysteriously missing from his study, but a draft was found in Simon's satchel. Poirot scanned the sketch. There, hidden in the curvature of the maze, a detail, a bench that did not exist. Poirot asked to see the maze. At its heart, behind a wall of yew, lay a hidden alcove. A glass sat on the bench. Lipstick, irises, and a glove, Lady Cynthia's. Curious, Poirot whispered, "Two women, one lie." He confronted Iris first. "You were not in the herb garden the entire time." I stepped away briefly. "To meet Langley?" "No," she said. "To smoke. Alone." Poirot said nothing. Then he turned to Lady Cynthia. "You were seen heading toward the maze." "I lost my way," she replied stiffly. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You've walked this estate for years." She flinched. "He humiliated me." "Ah," Poirot said, "and now the garden bleeds." Second twist came when Simon confessed something else. I found a letter in Langley's drawer, addressed to Iris. He was going to leave her, cut her from the estate, from everything. Poirot nodded. So she had the strongest motive. But I didn't kill him, Iris insisted, when confronted. I knew he was leaving me, but I was relieved. Relieved? Yes. I hated what he'd become. Then why lie about your whereabouts? I thought, if I said I was with him, I'd be blamed. No, madame. You are blamed because your story is too clean. Finally, Poirot gathered the guests in the greenhouse. The dusk light filtered through stained glass. The orchids glistened like blood. This murder, Poirot began, was not a crime of passion, but of design. Just like the garden itself, he pointed to the sundial. The stake was not lying near the body by accident. It had been placed upright earlier that day, as part of the display. It was then removed later, used as a weapon, and the body was moved from the maze to the statue, for drama, for spectacle. He turned to Simon. You were the last to see Langley alive. He called you to the maze, promised a concession. Then he mocked you, denied you. Simon trembled. You struck him, not to kill, but to wound. But he fell. The sundial base cracked his skull, and you panicked. No, Simon whispered. No, Poirot raised a hand. You dragged him to the statue, staged the death. But someone saw you. He turned to Lady Cynthia. You followed them. You saw it happen. And rather than report it, you helped conceal it. Cynthia stood frozen. I didn't want scandal, not after what he said about me. And you, Iris, Poirot said gently. You knew, didn't you? Not from sight, but from his absence. And you said nothing, because the man who died was no longer your husband. He looked around the room. No one committed this crime alone. It was a death by committee. One act, 3 silences. Poirot sighed. In a garden full of guests, not one dared speak the truth. As the police arrived, he turned away, walking once more beneath the trellis of roses. Ah, he whispered, flowers grow by sunlight and water, but secrets flourish in silence. Chapter 11. Poirot notices what we missed. The grandfather clock struck 1. Its chime echoed down the silent marble halls of Belmond like a whisper returned from the dead. In the corridor outside the study, a single candle flickered in its sconce, though no breeze stirred the air. Below it, untouched for days, was the copper umbrella stand, except now one umbrella was missing. The kind of detail nobody noticed, nobody except Hercule Poirot, who stood alone in the dark, with narrowed eyes, and whispered to himself, Voilà, c'est toujours là, ce petit détail. Always, it is the thing not seen. The murder of Ernest Varner had occurred precisely 1 week ago. The guests had scattered. The estate remained locked. The investigators had written their final reports. The newspapers had moved on. A man dead in his locked study, blood on his waistcoat, a suicide note typed on his personal typewriter. The conclusion, signed and sealed. Suicide under financial ruin and personal disgrace. A tragic end for a once-celebrated industrialist. But Poirot had lingered. He had lingered because something, no, many things, had been too easy. And Poirot, unlike the others, had noticed what was missed. The suicide note had been typed, but Varner was left-handed and preferred to write in ink. The inkwell on his desk had not been used. The typewriter bore no fingerprints, not even his. The gun had been fired from the right side. The angle of entry had been slightly upward. And most importantly, Poirot had noticed that Varna's belt buckle was unfastened, turned sideways as if someone had redressed the corpse hastily. The others had dismissed the buckle, but Poirot had not. Now, in the quiet of the hall, Poirot studied the umbrella stand. The missing umbrella was not ordinary. He remembered it, a black handle with a carved silver tip, monogrammed with the initials L.A. He had seen it upon his first arrival days earlier, when the suspects were still together, when the house still breathed with secrets. The suspects, 3, as always. First, Lucinda Arling, Varna's secretary of 7 years. Sharp, cold, efficient. She had been the first to find the body. Her screams had been credible, her grief quiet and appropriate. She was one of the few who had not profited from Varna's death, or so it seemed. Second, Gideon March, Varna's business partner, a man with charm, polished like glass, hiding, an ambition as cutting as steel. The collapse of Varna's financial empire had left Gideon in a precarious position, except that after the death, Gideon quietly assumed control of the remaining assets. Third, Marlene Varna, the wife, 20 years his junior, beautiful, brittle, unpredictable. Her mourning was theatrical, her sobs too precise, as though staged for an audience no longer present. There had been rumors of infidelity, of blackmail, of her preparing to leave him. But in the wake of his death, she inherited everything, on the condition she remained unmarried for 5 years. Too perfect, Poirot had murmured to himself after reading the will. Always, it is the conditions that hide the truth. Act 1. The crime. The study door had been locked from within. The gun, a .32 revolver, found in Varna's right hand. The suicide note on the desk read, "I can no longer carry the burden I have created. Forgive me." It had no date, no signature. The ink on the note was fresh, but the ribbon in the typewriter had been dry. Poirot had run his finger across it. The ink had come from somewhere else. And the umbrella? Ah, the umbrella. Poirot remembered Lucinda Arling, insisting she had not left the drawing room during the hour in question. He remembered Marlene wandering the garden, observed by the maid, her gloves muddy, but her shoes spotless. And he remembered Gideon's cigar, placed delicately in the ashtray, half burnt, as if to suggest presence when there had been none. Act 2. The clues began to surface. Poirot returned to the study and opened the desk drawer again. The suicide note paper came from a stack in the second drawer, but the top sheet of the stack was missing a corner, as though someone had removed a poorly torn page. Poirot found that scrap under the rug, barely visible, folded and stepped on, but unmistakably a fragment of the suicide note. It had been assembled from cut pages. Poirot examined. The safe, it was locked. The key hung around Varna's neck at the time of death. Inside were letters, among them one unsigned, typed in haste, warning Varna that someone close was preparing to betray him. Poirot noticed the spacing, slightly off. The ribbon had a faint tear pattern. He matched it to the one in Lucinda Arling's typewriter. When questioned, she denied everything. "He dictated letters," she said. "I typed many for him." "Yes," Poirot replied, "but never threats." Gideon March became agitated. "This is absurd. If he was going to accuse us, he'd have done so, not left riddles." "But riddles, monsieur," Poirot replied, "are what the guilty fear most, because the truth it hides in plain sight. Poirot then confronted Marlene. "You inherited his estate," he said, "but you remained in the marriage. Why?" She smiled. "Because the contract was clear." Poirot leaned in. "But he did not write the contract. You did, in legal partnership with Gideon March, hidden in a secondary codicil, witnessed by Lucinda." Marlene's face stiffened. Poirot whispered, "3 people, 1 crime, each tied to the other by a need to survive. But one acted first. Act 3, the reveal." Poirot gathered them all in the drawing room. "The umbrella," he began, "was the key. Monogrammed L.A., Lucinda Arling. It was used to prop open the study door during the murder. You see, the lock was broken and fixed after the fact. I found tool marks on the inside. The locked room was not so locked after all." He turned to Lucinda. "You staged the suicide. You found the letter, one Gideon and Marlene had written to threaten Varna, and used it. You typed the suicide note using Gideon's ribbon. You borrowed Marlene's gloves to place the gun, but you made mistakes." "To protect myself," Lucinda said, her voice cracking. Poirot shook his head. "No, mademoiselle. You did it out of vengeance. You had remained loyal. And when he betrayed you, by choosing the others, you took justice." He turned to Gideon. "You profited. You helped rewrite the will, but you did not kill." Then to Marlene. "You orchestrated the financial coup, but you did not pull the trigger." Poirot took a long breath. "In the end, it was not about money. It was about betrayal. Lucinda, he promised to make you his equal, but when he chose them, you saw the truth." Lucinda sobbed. "I was nothing to him after all these years." Poirot nodded. "And so, you made him nothing." As the police took her away, Poirot remained by the fireplace. "Hastings," he would later write, "people notice so much. The grand gesture, the sharp words, the cries and the dramatics. But it is the small things, an umbrella moved, a ribbon changed, a lock too clean, that reveal the soul of a murder." He looked once more at the umbrella stand. It was full again. But the truth, it had already left the room. Chapter 12. The smile that solved everything. His smile was wrong. That was the first thing Poirot noticed. Before the blood, before the silence, before the woman's trembling voice on the phone saying, "He's dead. Please come quickly." The corners of the victim's mouth were pulled upward as if wired, the expression frozen somewhere between peace and mockery. But it was the eyes, blank and open, staring through the dusk-drenched conservatory glass, that made Poirot stop mid-step and whisper, "Ah, so we arrive not at the beginning of the end, but the end of the beginning." The body of Lawrence Hargrave lay collapsed in the Belmonde's sunroom, which now, as if in grim irony, bore the hue of dying sunlight. Hargrave was a collector of rare art, obscure poisons, and even rarer enemies. He was also the final loose thread in a mystery that had slowly coiled through every room of the estate. 12 murders, 12 clues, and now one final smile. Poirot had seen smiles before, on liars, on lovers, on the guilty and the doomed. But this one was sculpted, deliberate, not etched by emotion, but by design. Someone had not only killed Hargrave, they had chosen to make his final expression speak. The scene was pristine, too pristine. The body was posed in the antique cane chair. A single wine glass sat on the table beside him, still half full, and a plate of untouched canapés. On the ground, the faintest trail of soil, leading from the garden, path to the threshold, just enough to suggest the killer had walked straight through the roses, and in the corner, beneath a sheer cloth, a camera tripod with no camera, Poirot murmured, "A man dies smiling, and still he tells no joke," which means someone else is laughing. The suspects were gathered quickly. Each had been entangled with Hargrave in ways they claimed were circumstantial, innocent, or professional. But Poirot, ever fastidious, knew better. A murderer always lingers near their masterpiece. First, there was Vivian Astor, Hargrave's former lover and the last to see him alive. A gallery owner with lips too red and grief too perfectly smudged. "We were reconciling," she told Poirot. "He asked to meet, to talk." He poured the wine himself. "Of course," Poirot said softly. "And the glass you drank from?" "I didn't. I had to leave." "A phone call." "Ah, yes. The kind that arrives conveniently when poison needs a moment to work." Second, Inspector Arlen, surprisingly still in residence, having remained to review unresolved elements from the previous investigations. Poirot found this odd. Arlen rarely lingered, without purpose. "You disliked him," Poirot observed. "You said so often." "I disliked his arrogance. Not enough to kill him. None, perhaps not, but enough to let someone else do it." And third, Henrietta Vale, the elusive heiress of the Belmont family, returned unexpectedly that morning, after a year, abroad. She had once been engaged to Hargrave. The engagement ended when he sold a family heirloom painting without her consent. "He betrayed my trust," she said, voice composed, "but I did not kill him." Poirot smiled gently. Even the betrayed mademoiselle sometimes smile when revenge blooms. In Act 1, the crime stood deceptively still. Hargrave's death was quiet, clean. A heart attack, the coroner had said, possibly stress-induced, but Poirot doubted it. The man had been healthy, boisterous, arrogant. The cause of death was eventually revealed to be a rare alkaloid, a plant-derived poison with no taste, only a slight bitterness when mixed with alcohol. The wine had masked it perfectly, yet no fingerprints were found on the wine glass or on the bottle. The bottle itself had been wiped clean, but poorly. The cork bore the faint outline of a thumbprint pressed in too deep. Poirot noted the flaw. Act 2 revealed the fractures beneath each alibi. Vivienne had indeed received a call at the time of death, but from her own gallery. The caller, when tracked, admitted they had been instructed to call and ask a fabricated question. They assumed it was part of an elaborate art prank. "Prank?" Poirot echoed. "Non, madame. A distraction." Inspector Arlen's pocket watch was off by 5 minutes. Poirot observed it during tea. That gap, small and seemingly meaningless, placed him at the conservatory minutes earlier than he had claimed. He denied this, but Poirot noted the perspiration that bloomed behind his ear, a tell he'd seen before. And Henrietta? Her arrival at Belmont was documented at precisely 9:15 a.m. via train, but a valet remembered seeing her cloak hung by the east veranda at dawn. Impossible, unless she'd arrived earlier. The details, Poirot said to himself, are not lies. They are truths spoken in a whisper. In the midst of this, a new clue emerged. A photograph, not found on Hargrave, but slipped under Poirot's door. It was a print, black and white, slightly blurred. It showed Hargrave, seated in the conservatory, glass in hand, smiling, the exact same smile, but the photograph had been taken the previous night. Impossible, Arlen muttered. That's how he was found. Not posed, not mimicked. That's the same smile. Poirot studied it, the lighting, the angle, the chair. Then he noticed, beneath the table, a small shadow, a shoe, high-heeled, slightly scuffed. Not Hargrave's. Vivian denied knowing anything about the photograph. Arlen suggested it could have been staged in advance. Henrietta asked, but why would anyone photograph a man as he's being murdered? Poirot replied, because mademoiselle, the smile, it was the message. He returned to the garden, following the trail of soil. The footprint ended at a bench. Buried just beneath it, he found a handkerchief, embroidered, perfumed. With lipstick, Henrietta's shade, she confessed to visiting the conservatory, but not to the murder. He asked me to forgive him. We talked. I gave him the handkerchief to clean his lens. He said he wanted to capture the moment, said he wanted to make things right. Poirot blinked. Capture the moment. That was it. Hargrave had posed himself, smiled, deliberately, poured the wine, raised the glass, pressed the shutter. Poirot summoned them all. This case, he began, was solved not by the poison, nor the timing, nor even the lies. It was solved by the smile, because it was not the smile of peace. It was the smile of knowing, of outwitting. He turned to Vivian. You loved him once, but now you hated him, and yet you did not kill him. Your call was the alibi, but it was not your plan. To Arlen, you despised him. You tampered with evidence, but not the wine. To Henrietta, you visited him, you forgave him, and yet, when you left, he was alive. Poirot held up the photograph. Hargrave knew he would die. He'd discovered the poison, perhaps too late, but just in time to leave behind a message, the smile, the position, the shadow in the photo, a witness, not just a murderer. Poirot turned toward the only person not yet questioned aloud, the photographer's assistant. Miss Evelyn Frey, Poirot said softly, you were with Hargrave last night. You helped him set up the camera. You knew he'd uncovered your theft, the missing paintings, forged catalogues. You worked under Vivienne. You blamed Hargrave for not protecting you when she dismissed you. The young woman's eyes welled. He asked me to stay, just for one more photo. He said, he forgave me. Poirot nodded slowly. He forgave you, yes, but he also trapped you. The photo was insurance. And now, it is confession. As she was led away in tears, Poirot stood before the final photograph. A man smiles, not just to deceive, but to deliver a final truth, he whispered. And sometimes, that smile says everything. The case was closed, but the smile remained.